The fever had taken everything but her life, and the wagon train had taken her life in turn. They had left her in dusty little Harmony Creek with a kind word and a half-promise to send for her things, a promise Ruth Ann knew was as empty as the horizon they'd disappeared into. For 3 weeks she had mended in the boarding house, her small purse thinning with every meal, every night's lodging. When the last of her coins were gone, she was turned out with the same polite regret she was coming to understand as the West's particular brand of cruelty. She walked. There was nothing else to do. She followed the deep ruts of the trail west, a ghost haunting the path of a life that had moved on without her. Her only possessions were the clothes on her back, a sturdy pair of boots, a small blanket, and a water skin that was nearly empty. The sun was a hammer, the dust a shroud. In Harmony Creek, they had spoken of the lands ahead, unsettled, empty. Especially the high country, the old Callaway spread. Lost after the war, the men in the general store had said, their words thick with the lazy certainty of town gossip. The whole valley picked over and sold off, all except one corner of it, a place no one wanted. A line shack, they'd called it, high up on a ridge. Stood abandoned since the war, 20 years gone. Cursed, some said. Haunted, said others. Just plain empty, said the most sensible. And there was no water up there anyway. Ruth Ann wasn't looking for a haunting, she was looking for shelter. The sky to the west was bruising, the clouds turning the color of old iron. A storm was coming, a real plains monster, and she was a solitary soul in a vast, uncaring wilderness. The trail bent south, but a faint track, little more than a memory of a path, broke away and climbed into the rolling hills that bulked against the mountains. Toward the Callaway land, toward the shack, toward the only roof for 50 miles. She took the path. For hours, she climbed. The air grew thin and cool, smelling of pine and damp earth. The prairie grass gave way to stands of aspen and ponderosa. She was weaker than she thought, the fever having burned away her reserves. Every step was an argument with her own body. The wind began to moan through the trees, a low, mournful sound that seemed to pull the warmth from her skin. Rain, cold and hard, began to fall. Not a gentle shower, but a driving assault that plastered her dress to her limbs and turned the faint path to slick mud. She was shivering, her teeth chattering, the world blurring at the edges. She had survived a fever only to die of the cold in a land that did not want her. The thought came without pity, a simple statement of fact. Then she saw it. Through a curtain of rain and the gathering dusk, a shape. A low, dark rectangle against the skyline, hunkered down as if against the very storm now trying to tear her from the earth. The line shack. It was exactly as bleak as the gossip had promised. The wood was silvered and gray, weathered to the bone. The roof sagged in the middle, a broken spine. The single window was a dark, vacant eye. It looked dead. A place where life had happened once and then been forgotten. The men were right. It was empty. But it was a roof. She stumbled toward it, her boots sliding in the mud. She was so cold, her hands clumsy and numb. She reached the door, a solid slab of wood warped in its frame, and leaned her forehead against it. The wood was cold, wet. For a moment she just stood there, gathering the last of her strength. Then she noticed it. To the right of the door, stacked neatly against the wall under the slight overhang of the roof, was a small pile of wood. Not the gray, rotted leavings of 20 years ago. This was pine, split fresh. The sharp, clean scent of it cut through the damp air. The ends were a pale, creamy yellow against the dark, weathered wall. Fresh. Someone had cut this wood. Recently. The discovery was a jolt, a shock of warmth in her frozen veins. The shack wasn't empty. Or if it was now, it hadn't been this afternoon. Hope was a dangerous thing, but it was all she had left. She was a woman alone, approaching a stranger's shelter in the middle of nowhere. It was a fool's act. But the alternative was freezing to death a few feet from a dry floor. She lifted a hand that felt like a stone and knocked. The sound was small, swallowed by the rising howl of the wind. She waited, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Nothing. The silence from within was as profound as the storm's noise without. She had been wrong. A drifter, maybe, who had cut the wood and moved on. Disappointment was a cold, familiar weight. She was about to turn away, to seek the meager shelter of a pine tree, when she heard it. A sound from inside. A scuff. A shifting of weight. Then a voice, low and rough as a file on iron. "Go on." It wasn't a question. It was a dismissal, a command. But it was a human voice. The word bloomed in the cold air, real, solid. Someone was in there. The title was a lie. The whole story was a lie. Ruth Ann did not go on. She could not. "Please," she called out, her own voice thin and reedy against the wind. "The storm. I need shelter." Silence again. The rain was turning to sleet, stinging her face. She could feel the last of her warmth being stolen away. She was starting to feel strangely distant from herself, her shivering growing less violent as a deep, creeping numbness set in. This was it then. The latch inside made a sound, a dry, metallic click. The door opened, but only a crack. A sliver of darkness, then a shape blocking it. A man. He was a silhouette against the deeper gloom of the cabin, broad-shouldered and tall. He said nothing. "Please," she repeated, the word a prayer. "Just until it passes. I won't be any trouble." He stared at her for a long moment. She could feel his gaze, weighing her, measuring her desperation. She didn't try to hide it. She let him see the rain dripping from her hair, the way she swayed with exhaustion. Finally, he spoke again, his voice flat. "I've got no room. A corner of the floor is all I need," she said. "I have my own blanket." He seemed to consider this. The wind tore at her, pushing her forward, as if trying to force his decision. "You bring trouble," he said. It wasn't a question. "The only trouble I have is this storm," she whispered. "And I'm losing." Another long silence. Then, with a sigh that sounded like stones grinding together, he pulled the door open wider. "Get in." She stumbled past him into the shack, bringing a gust of wind and rain with her. He shut the door, and the sound of the storm was instantly muted, reduced to a dull roar. The sudden quiet was as startling as the noise had been. The inside of the shack was dark, lit only by the faint dying glow of embers in a small stone fireplace. It was one room, small and spare. A narrow cot was pushed against one wall, a rough table and a single chair against the other. It smelled of wood smoke, dust, and something else. A deep, abiding loneliness. The man did not look at her. He moved to the fireplace and nudged the embers with a poker. A few sparks flew. "Stay by the fire," he said, his back to her. "Don't expect breakfast." Ruth Ann huddled on the hearth, her body shaking uncontrollably now that the immediate danger was past. She was too tired to even feel grateful. She was just here, alive. She watched the man's back. He was a study in sharp angles, his shoulders tense, his movements economical and deliberate. He wore a simple homespun shirt, worn thin at the elbows. He was the ghost of the line shack, made flesh. And he had let her in. That first night passed in a blur of shivering and exhaustion. He gave her a wide berth, moving about the small space as if she were a piece of furniture he had to navigate around. He added a log to the fire, and she watched the flames lick it, her mind empty. He sat in the single chair, his face in shadow, and did not speak. Ruth Ann eventually unrolled her damp blanket on the floor near the hearth and collapsed onto it, falling into a sleep so deep it was like a drowning. She woke to silence. The storm had passed. Pale morning light filtered through the single grime-filmed window. The fire was a bed of warm coals, and the shack was cold. She sat up, stiff and sore, her clothes still damp. The man was gone. For a wild moment she thought she had dreamed him. But a tin cup of water sat on the floor beside her blanket, and on the table, a single, hard biscuit. He hadn't just left her water, he had left her food. It was the plainest, most grudging charity, but it was more than she'd had from anyone in weeks. She ate the biscuit slowly, drank the water. The small act of kindness settled in her stomach like a warm stone. She looked around the shack in the clear light of day. It was brutally simple. The cot had a single threadbare blanket folded neatly upon it. The floor was packed earth, swept clean. There were no decorations, no personal touches, save for one thing. In a corner, leaning against the wall, was a branding iron. The head was heavy, shaped into an intricate C, entwined with an L. Calloway. She traced the shape in the air with her finger. She spent the morning by the fire, drying her clothes. She expected him to return, but the hours passed in profound silence. The world outside the open door was washed clean, the sky a brilliant, aching blue. She could not stay. She knew that. This was his place, his solitude she had invaded. But she was not yet strong enough to leave. The fever had left a deeper mark than she knew. When he finally returned in the late afternoon, he carried a rabbit, already skinned and cleaned. He didn't acknowledge her presence, walking straight to the fireplace and beginning to prepare it. Ruth Ann watched him, her hands folded in her lap. His name, she thought, must be Calloway. Or he worked for them, though she couldn't imagine who. "My name is Ruth Ann," she said to his back. He paused in his work but didn't turn. "I didn't ask." "I know," she said quietly. "But it's my name all the same." He said nothing for a long time. Then, "Cade." The name hung in the air between them. Cade. It suited him. Short, hard, unyielding. "Thank you for the biscuit," she said. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. He spitted the rabbit and set it over the fire. The smell of it cooking filled the small space, a rich, savory scent that made her stomach clench with a hunger she hadn't realized was so sharp. When it was done, he pulled it from the fire, tore a leg off, and handed it to her on a piece of bark. He took the rest for himself and retreated to his chair, eating in his customary silence. They stayed like that for 3 days, an unlikely, unspoken truce. The storm had been followed by a cold snap, and a journey down the mountain would have been foolish. So she stayed. She did not ask, he did not offer. It was a fact, like the weather. During the day, he would disappear for hours, returning with wood, or a rabbit, or nothing at all. He never said where he went. Ruth Ann, in turn, made herself useful in small, quiet ways. She swept the floor with a makeshift broom of pine boughs. She took the tin cup and a bucket she found outside to a small, clear spring she discovered 100 yards from the shack, bringing back fresh water. One morning, she took a rag from her own small bundle, dampened it, and cleaned the single window. The grime was thick, a cataract of years. It took her the better part of an hour, but when she was done, clean, bright sunlight streamed into the cabin, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. When Cade returned that afternoon, he stopped dead in the doorway, staring at the beam of light hitting the floor. He looked at the clean window, then at her. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone and shadow. She thought he would be angry, that she had overstepped, taken a liberty with his world. But he just grunted and walked past her to the fireplace, his silence heavier than usual. That evening, however, when he sat in his chair, he angled it slightly so that his face was in the last of the evening light from the clean window. Their conversations were sparse, fragments of speech in a vast sea of quiet. "Where were you headed?" he asked one evening, his voice startling her. "West," she said. "Oregon, maybe. The wagon train I was with went on without me." He looked at her, a flicker of something in his dark eyes. "Why?" "I had a fever. In Harmony Creek." He nodded slowly as if that explained everything. "Towns," he said, the word a curse. "And people." Another day she was mending a tear in her dress when he came and stood over her. She looked up. He was holding out a needle and a spool of dark, sturdy thread. "Yours is about to break," he said, and walked away before she could thank him. The needle was a small, fine thing. The thread was strong. She stitched her dress, the small, even stitches a comfort. She was a competent woman, and it was a relief to do a competent thing. While she worked, she watched him. He was cleaning a rifle, his hands moving with an expertise that was both fascinating and unsettling. His hands were large and calloused, a working man's hands, but they were not clumsy. She noticed a network of old scars on his left forearm, pale and silvery, as if from a bad burn long ago. The slow, quiet rhythm of their days was a strange kind of healing. The shack, which had at first seemed a prison of circumstance, began to feel like a sanctuary. The silence was no longer empty, but full of unspoken things, of a shared existence that was oddly peaceful. She found herself watching him, the way he moved, the set of his jaw, the moments he would stand at the door and stare out at the mountains, his face a landscape of old grief. He was a damaged man, she knew, damaged and hiding, but there was a core of decency to him, buried deep. The biscuit, the needle, the way he always made sure the woodbox was full before nightfall. One afternoon, she decided to walk, to test her strength. She followed the faint path away from the shack, not down the mountain, but further up. The air was crisp and clean. After a quarter mile, the path opened into a small, hidden meadow, and in the meadow was a horse, a single, beautiful buckskin mare, grazing peacefully. She wore no saddle, but a simple leather halter. As Ruth Ann approached, the mare lifted her head, her ears pricked. She was not afraid. Ruth Ann held out a hand, speaking in a low, soothing voice. The horse watched her, then took a hesitant step forward and nudged her palm with its soft nose. It was a gentle, trusting creature. On its flank, almost hidden in the pale coat, was a brand. The same brand as the iron in the shack, the C and the L, intertwined. So this was where he went. He came here, to this hidden meadow, to this horse. He was not just a squatter. He was keeping a horse. That meant he had hay, grain. It meant he had a reason to stay. When she returned to the shack, he was there, mending a piece of leather tack. "I saw your horse," she said. He stiffened, his hands stilling. "She's not mine." "She wears your brand," Ruth Ann said softly. He looked up, his eyes dark. "It's not my brand. It was my family's." He looked down at his hands, the Callaways. The name was spoken. It changed the air in the room. He was a Callaway, the son of the family that had lost this land. He was not a ghost haunting someone else's history. He was haunting his own. "This was all your family's land?" she asked. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the distance he could see through the open door. "This valley, all of it, before the war." "What happened?" "The war happened," he said, his voice flat and hard. "My father went. My brother went. Only my father came back. And the man who came back wasn't the one who left. He was broken. A man named Reed, from back east, came with paper. Said my father owed money. Said the land was forfeit. My father didn't fight. He had no fight left in him. Reed took everything." "But you stayed?" she said. "I stayed," he repeated. "This shack, It wasn't on the papers Reed held. It was forgotten, overlooked. He looked at her then, his eyes burning with a cold fire. So I'm overlooking him right back. The confession left a new kind of silence in its wake. Not peaceful, but charged. She knew his name. She knew his story, or part of it. The wall of his solitude had a crack in it, and she was on the inside. She didn't know what to do with the knowledge. It felt heavy and precious. The next day, she knew she had to leave. The weather was fair. Her strength was returning. She could not stay here forever in this strange limbo. She packed her small blanket. She had no food, but the town was a day's walk. She would make it. She found Cade by the spring, watching the water bubble up from the ground. "I'm leaving," she said. He didn't seem surprised. He just nodded. "Down the mountain is your best bet. The trail hits the main road in about 10 miles. "Thank you, Cade," she said, "for the shelter, for everything." "I did nothing," he said, turning to face her. The sun was behind him, putting his face in shadow. "You let me in," she said. "That was something." He looked at her, a long, searching look. For a moment she thought he would say something more. Ask her to stay. Tell her not to go. But he just gave a curt nod. "Good luck, Ruth Ann." He said her name. It sounded different in his mouth. Not a label, but a recognition. It made her feet feel like lead. But she turned and walked away. Down the faint path. Away from the line shack. Away from the man who lived like a ghost in his own past. The walk to Harmony Creek was long and lonely. With every step, the quiet peace of the shack receded, replaced by the noise and bustle of the world. She got a job at the boarding house, the same one that had thrown her out. Mending, cleaning, cooking. The work was hard, the pay was small, but it was a toehold. She saved every penny. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Cade. Alone in that shack with his ghosts and his quiet grief. The image of him standing by the spring was burned into her mind. She thought of the clean window, the way the light had fallen on his face. Her new life was interrupted by a man named Reed. He was the owner of the Mercantile, a large florid man with small, shrewd eyes. He was the most powerful man in town, and he was the man who had taken the Calloway land. He had heard about the woman who had come down from the mountains. He found her in the boarding house kitchen, her arms deep in soapy water. "You're the one," he said, blocking the doorway. "The one who was squatting up on my property." Ruth Ann dried her hands on her apron. "I was caught in a storm, Mr. Reed. A man let me shelter." "A man?" Reed's eyes narrowed. "There's no man up there. That shack's been empty for 20 years. You were trespassing. I own that land, all the way to the ridge. I want you to stay away from it. And if you see this man of yours again, you tell him I'll have the sheriff run him off so fast his boots won't touch the ground." His arrogance was suffocating. He waved a dismissive hand and left, leaving her with the smell of his cheap cigars and the weight of his threat. He was a bully, a man used to getting his way, and he was a danger to Cade. She had to warn him. She bought a few supplies with her meager savings: flour, salt, coffee, and a small bag of oats for the buckskin mare. She told the boarding house owner she was leaving for a day, then she started back up the mountain. It was a different journey this time. She was stronger, and she was not running from the world, but toward a small, specific part of it. She found the shack as dusk was falling. A thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney. A faint light glowed in the window she had cleaned. He was there. She knocked. This time, the door opened almost immediately. Cade stood there, his face grim. "You came back," he said. It wasn't a question. "I had to," she said, pushing the bag of supplies into his hands. "His name is Reed. He knows someone is up here. He threatened to send the sheriff." Cade looked down at the bag in his hands, at the small sack of oats. He looked back at her, and for the first time, she saw the wall around him crumble. She saw not the recluse, not the ghost, but a man pushed to the very edge of his endurance. "You should not have come back," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "This is not your fight." "Maybe it is," she said. "You gave me shelter, Cade. You don't just walk away from a thing like that." He let her in. The shack was the same, but different. It was colder, emptier without her. He had let the fire burn low. The window was starting to gather a new film of dust. He had retreated back into his solitude. "He'll come," Cade said, staring into the fire. "Reed. He won't let it be. He's a man who has to own everything, even the silence." "Then you have to fight him," she said. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "With what? This shack? A horse he doesn't know about? He has deeds, papers. He has the law in his pocket." "He has paper," Ruth Ann said, thinking hard. "But you have the truth." She remembered the branding iron, the stories. There had to be something. "The shack wasn't on the papers, you said. It was overlooked. Why?" He shook his head. "I don't know. My mother's father built it, long before my father even owned the valley. It was always just here." "Then maybe the deed to it is separate," she insisted. "Maybe it was never part of the main ranch sale." It was a sliver of a hope, but it was something. The next morning, she went back to town. Cade didn't try to stop her. He just watched her go, his face a mask of weary resignation. In Harmony Creek, she went not to the boarding house, but to the county clerk's office. It was a dusty, neglected room, filled with massive ledgers and rolled maps. The clerk was an old man with spectacles perched on his nose. She told him she was researching old land claims for a story. It was a flimsy lie, but he was more interested in his newspaper than in her. For 2 days she pored over the records. She searched for Calloway. She found the main deed transfer to Reed, a thick document full of legal language that made her head ache. She cross-referenced it with old survey maps. The lines were confusing, overlapping, but she was persistent. On the afternoon of the second day, she found it. A small, separate entry in a ledger from 1845. A deed for a 10-acre plot, described by landmarks. From the split rock to the 3 tall pines. A plot deeded not to Cade's father, but to his mother, inherited from her own father. A plot that contained a spring and a small structure, a line shack. The deed had never been consolidated with the main ranch. When Reed had bought the Calloway land, he had bought the main parcel. He had not bought this small, forgotten square. It was still in the Calloway name. It was legally Cade's. She ran her finger over the entry, her heart pounding. Paper against truth. Reed had his paper, but this was an older, truer paper. She practically ran back up the mountain, the copy of the deed clutched in her hand. She found the shack empty, the door ajar. A cold fear gripped her. Had Reed come already? She pushed the door open. The shack was in disarray. The chair was overturned. The blanket from the cot was on the floor. He was gone. Then she heard it. A horse whinnying, sharp with fear. From the direction of the hidden meadow. She ran, her breath tearing in her lungs. She burst into the meadow and saw them. Reed and 2 of his hired men. They had a rope on the buckskin mare, who was fighting, pulling back, her eyes wide with terror. And they had Cade. One of the men held him, his arms pinned behind his back. Reed stood before him, his face flushed with victory. "I told you I'd run you off, squatter," Reed was saying. "This is my land. This horse is on my land. That makes her my horse, a fine piece of stock. I'll get a good price for her." "She's not yours," Cade growled, struggling against the man holding him. "And this is not your land." "Oh, isn't it?" Reed sneered. "Show me the paper that says so." "I have it." Ruth Ann's voice cut through the tense air. All 4 men turned to look at her. She stood at the edge of the meadow holding the folded document. She was breathing hard, but her voice was steady. She walked forward, right up to Reed, and held out the paper. This is a deed from 1845 for this 10-acre plot. It was never part of the main ranch. It was never sold. It belongs to him. Reed snatched the paper and scanned it, his face turning from red to purple. He looked at the landmarks described, at the name on the deed. He looked at Cade. "This is a trick," he blustered, but the confidence had gone out of his voice. "It's from the county clerk's office," Ruth Ann said calmly. "The sheriff can verify it. This is Cade Calloway's land, and that is his horse. You are the one who is trespassing, Mr. Reed. And stealing." Reed stared at her, then at Cade, who was now standing free, the hired man having let him go. The entire dynamic had shifted. The power had moved. Reed crumpled the paper in his fist. For a second, Ruth Ann thought he would lunge at her, at Cade, but he was a man who understood paper. He was beaten. With a curse, he threw the copied deed on the ground. "This isn't over," he snarled, but it was. He motioned to his men, and the three of them stomped away through the trees, their defeat a palpable thing. Silence descended on the meadow. The buckskin mare, now free, walked straight to Cade and pushed her head against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her neck, burying his face in her mane. Ruth Ann watched them, her heart aching with a strange mix of triumph and tenderness. He finally lifted his head and looked at her. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick. "You saved this place." "You would have done the same for me," she said, though she wasn't sure it was true. He walked toward her, closing the distance between them. He stopped just before her, his eyes searching her face. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you do all this?" She could have said it was for justice. She could have said it was to spite Reed. But she told him the truth. "Because a person can't live like a ghost forever," she said, "and because no one should be that alone." He reached out and took her hand. His hand was warm, strong. "I haven't been alone," he said softly, "since the day you knocked on my door." He looked back at the shack, a place of shadow and memory. "There's one more thing you should know. Why I stayed. In this shack." He led her back, his hand still holding hers. Inside, he went to a small, dusty trunk in the corner she had never paid much mind. He lifted the lid. Inside were not clothes or tools, but a small tarnished silver lamp and a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. "My brother," Cade said, his voice low. "He gave me this lamp before he left for the war. He said, 'Keep a light on for me, Cade, so I can find my way home.' I promised I would. This was the last place I saw him. Right here." He picked up the lamp. "He never came home, but I kept my promise. Every night for 20 years I've lit this lamp. It felt like if I stopped he would die a second time." The truth of it settled over her, vast and profound. The quiet ritual, the lonely vigil. It wasn't just protest. It was love. A promise kept across 2 decades of silence and grief. That was the secret the Line Shack held. Not a haunting, but a heartbreak. "You don't have to light it alone anymore," she whispered. He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the 20 years of solitude finally coming to an end. He reached out and gently touched her face, his calloused thumb tracing her cheekbone. "No," he said, "I don't." That evening, as dusk settled over the mountain, they lit the lamp together. Its small, steady flame pushed back the shadows, filling the little shack with a warm, golden light. It was no longer a light for a ghost. It was a light for the living. The seasons turned. The Line Shack on the Calloway land became a home. Ruth Ann and Cade filed the old deed, and their claim was undeniable. The town of Harmony Creek, which had dismissed her, now whispered of her in awe. The woman who had knocked on a ghost door and found a life. Reed sold his mercantile and moved on, his power broken by a truth he could not bully. One day, Cade brought the buckskin mare, whose name was Bess, from the hidden meadow down to a new corral he had built beside the shack. He and Ruth Ann added a room with a real glass window that faced the sunrise. He taught her the names of the mountains. She read to him from books she bought in town. Their silences were no longer filled with things unsaid, but with a deep, comfortable peace. One evening, sitting on the small porch they had built, watching the valley fill with purple shadows, Ruth Ann asked him a question that had lingered in her mind. "Would you have opened that door," she asked, "if I hadn't knocked?" Cade thought for a long moment, his gaze on the far horizon. "I would have spent the rest of my life waiting to hear it," he said, "and I never would have known why." He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, a familiar, comforting weight. The light from the lamp they had lit together spilled from the window, a small, defiant star in the vast, quiet dark. She had come to this place with nothing, a woman the world had discarded. She had knocked on a door that should have been locked, and a man who had been lost had answered. And together, in a place forgotten by everyone else, they had built a home. The world is full of abandoned places and lost people, she thought, and sometimes all it takes is the courage to knock, to see if someone, against all odds, might just answer. Have you ever found something beautiful in a place everyone else called empty? The question settled in her heart, not as a doubt, but as a quiet affirmation of the life she had found. A life that had been waiting for her, all along, behind a closed door.